What's going on, everybody? It's Joel here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Avancus Apex Power Shoe. Alright, so right off the bat, I want to let you guys know that I've been testing and providing feedback on the Apex Powers since probably about December of last year. So despite the fact that they just came out, I have a lot of hours logged into these shoes. They didn't quite go with all of the design choices that I wanted them to go with, but I still think that these are probably the best pair of barefoot training shoes. And I say training shoes because I'm not like a dedicated power lifter or anything. Obviously in CrossFit, we do power lifts. So we back squat, we deadlift, we bench press, which these probably aren't gonna help you out with too much. But that said, if you've watched my videos in the past, you know that I'm not a huge fan of training in barefoot shoes because I think that there's quite a bit of downsides to it to cover up the upsides of wearing barefoot shoes. But anyways, the Apex Powers are supposed to be dedicated powerlifting shoe. They're more geared towards lifting, which typical barefoot shoes aren't really meant for. They're meant to be low to the ground. They're meant to have a lot of sensory feedback. And while the Apex Powers still have those qualities, they are made to be more stable overall. So with the construction of these shoes, we have two different upper materials. There's an Oxford cloth in the toe box, and I know that sounds kind of weird, but it does breathe fine. It's comfortable enough, and I think that it does a good job in holding your foot in place. We do have some overlays around the toe box to give you some more support or stability in that area of the shoe, and then around the back part of the shoe, it's made out of denim, and denim has a little bit of stretch to it, but I think overall, the ankle collar of this shoe is still rigid enough to do all of your lifts in. You also do have an overlay heel counter. There's no real structure to that part of the shoe other than the fact that it's just like a TPU or PU overlay. And then you do have some more overlays over the eye stays of the shoe, and then you've got the Avancus logo, which I believe on the white shoe now is gold, and on the black shoe is white. Why don't I just keep on going with the black shoe? So what really sets the Apex Powers apart from other barefoot shoes is the outsole shape and design. It's got a more flat contact outsole with more well-defined ridges. You do have extended contact points at the metatarsals and at the heels. And if I compared them to my Vivo Barefoot Primus Light knits, you'll see that the contact area is quite a bit wider, and the ridges or the edges of the shoe are more well defined versus the more like natural shape of a barefoot shoe. And it really comes down to what you're trying to get from a shoe. And the reason why I don't like using barefoot shoes is because typically they don't have the greatest lateral stability. And I know the reason why you would want to use a barefoot shoe is because you would want to move more naturally. But that doesn't always make its way into training that great, especially when it comes to like Olympic weightlifting or even powerlifting movements. The other reason why I don't really like training in barefoot shoes is because the grip is usually pretty bad. You can see here on the Primus Light knits that the lug depth is pretty much next to nothing, whereas on the Apex Power, you do have a 2mm lug depth. These things are very, very grippy, especially when you put them on the rubber flooring that you would normally find in a gym atmosphere. They also do really well on wooden platforms. I noticed that doing box jumps, I felt like these almost wanted to catch too much while I was doing my box jumps. So the leg depth on this shoe is 2mm, but the actual piece of rubber is only 4mm thick. So these are still very low and connected to the ground. The insole, which is removable, is only 3mm, and in my opinion, it doesn't get in the way, and I prefer to use it in, but the shoe does have turn down stitching in the inside, so if you wanted to use these Without the insole, you could do that as well and it would still be comfortable enough. Another thing that I really like about the construction of these shoes is the fact that the ankle collar has a little bit more support. It feels more like a shoe than like barefoot shoes would normally feel, where you can get a little bit more ankle roll. The only thing that I really don't care too much for with the Apex Power is the tongue. It's just a little cheap feeling, I guess, and it is not gusseted on the sides, though I don't really notice it shifting around when I'm doing my workouts in these shoes. And since these shoes have a little bit more to them than your typical barefoot shoes, they also carry a little bit more weight with them as well. I clocked in a men's size 10 at 319 grams or 11.2 ounces. Still pretty light for a training shoe, but pretty heavy for an actual barefoot shoe. And of course, they do have a 0mm drop. So when going to size your Apex Powers, it really just kind of depends on what you want to use these shoes for. If you are a dedicated powerlifter, like all you wanted to do was squats and deadlift in the shoe, I'm going to recommend that you go with your normal shoe size, or what I'm going to say is like Reebok shoe sizing. I got these in a size 10 and they fit me right on the money. There's not a whole lot of breathing room, but the toe box is very wide on these shoes, so I do have room for my toes to splay, and otherwise they're pretty comfortable. Now, the reason why I say it kind of depends on what you want to do in these shoes is because if you're looking to do training or CrossFit, I'd probably actually recommend sizing up or closer to your Nike shoe size. These do not come in a half size, and where I would normally wear like 10.5 in Nike, I would probably have to size these up to a size 11. I would want that extra breathing room in the shoe for my feet to expand after a more intense training session where I'm jumping around doing Olympic weightlifting, gymnastics, not just lifting. Either way you go, these shoes have a very wide toe box. So to compare to something that also has a very wide toe box, here are the Primus Lights and the Apex Powers. The Primus Lights do have a more open toe box. The Apex Powers feel a little bit flatter, but I can assure you that there's plenty of room in the toe box. I think even the widest feet are gonna fit these shoes just fine. All right, so when it comes to comfort and flexibility, these are unlike other barefoot shoes in that the fact that they're just not really even barefoot shoes at all. They're actually made to be lifting shoes. They just have no midsole and they have a 0 drop. So technically they would fit into the barefoot category, but they are made for lifting, which in turn makes them not as flexible as other barefoot shoes. But at that same time, they're still plenty flexible enough for normal training sessions. I'm not gonna say you're gonna wanna go running in these shoes. I don't even really like running in barefoot shoes in the first place, and running in these is not very comfortable. They do have a very wide contact patch that's very flat on the bottom, so they do feel pretty clunky when you're running, though it is manageable. I mean, probably up to a mile, depending on what your tolerances are for a barefoot shoe. I think that that's probably the amount of running that I would take them for. A couple 400s at a time, 200s, some sprints. I think that these would still be a good enough shoe to run in, but don't expect that these are gonna be a good road runner or a good trail runner, because they are pretty clunky minimalist or barefoot shoes. That being said, I still think they're comfortable enough for normal training sessions if you are into training barefoot or minimalist. These have that 3mm insole, which does give your foot a little bit of comfort for repeated bounding movements such as jump roping or just even box jumps. The grip on these shoes is actually pretty good, so it does assist you for when you're doing burpees. Where these shoes really shine is the fact that they are a barefoot shoe made for lifting. So typically, like I said before, barefoot shoes are not my favorite shoes to train in because I just don't think that they're very good to lift in. They allow your foot to move around a little bit too much. Lateral stability is typically not the greatest because they don't have well-defined edges, and that is all different on the Apex Power because these are once again made for lifting. The sidewalls on these shoes are raised up to cup the sides of your foot and provide more lateral support, lateral traction, and that extra torque that you want to put into the ground when you're doing deadlifts, or back squats. And furthermore, if you were somebody that wanted to do your Olympic lifts in a flat shoe, these would be the best ones for you because of that amount of ground contact and that lateral stability, both on the medial and lateral sides of the shoe. When you land in these, it's easier than most barefoot shoes to stabilize your foot because of the way that the outsole is shaped and the amount of grip that they have. The medial side of the shoe has even more raised up sidewalls. So if you wanted to use these for rope climbs, I think that they would actually be okay. And they might hurt your foot a little bit, but I think they'd be okay. Whether or not the upper will hold up to the rope abrasion, that's another question as well. But you know, if you wanted to and you were in a pinch, you could probably do it in these shoes as well. I like the heel geometry of the shoe as well. It has a very flat contact area, and then the sides of the heel raise up to make sure that your foot or your heel is stabilized for your more dynamic and your slower lifts. For the majority of my lifting, I kept the insole in, but if you were somebody that wanted to be as close to the ground as possible for your deadlifts, I definitely recommend that you take the insole out. That was the only situation where I took the insole out and I thought it was a better way to lift in these shoes. But for pretty much everything else, Olympic weightlifting and even my back squats, I kept the insole in. I thought it was comfortable and it did not detract from either of those lifts. Once again, it's only 3 millimeters and it's not going to bog down any of your responsiveness from these shoes. Being low to the ground is great and all, but the real difference maker between these shoes and other barefoot shoes is the fact that the grip on these is just far and beyond better than any other barefoot shoe, even the ones that are made for training, like the Zero 360 or the Zero Forza, which were probably my favorite barefoot shoes to train in before this, and are still very good shoes in their own right. They're probably a little bit more balanced, but the grip on the Apex Power is unparalleled when it comes to barefoot shoes. All right, so what are these shoes going to cost you? I honestly thought that they were going to retail for a lot more than they do because they fill a niche that nothing quite else replicates. But they only come in at $95 USD, and you can get these shipped to pretty much anywhere in the world. I think the company was based out of Dubai, so they do offer worldwide shipping, but you do have to pay for it. Shipping to the United States is something like $14, which is still pretty reasonable for a pair of training shoes, a pair of barefoot shoes, which I think are just overpriced in the first place. I think that something that's right around $100 hits a really, really good price point in this training footwear market. So even though these shoes were made for powerlifting, squat, deadlift, they adapt very well into minimalist or barefoot training scenarios. If you were somebody that did CrossFit or did Olympic weightlifting or just did general training and you didn't like the shortcomings of typical barefoot shoes, I would recommend that you check out the Apex Powers. These have been my go-to training shoe when I want something flat and low to the ground. And at the price point that they're at, you really owe it to yourself to try them out. You can also save 10% on these shoes using code AMRAP, A-M-R-A-P. I'll leave a link in the description so that you can pick up a pair. Only $95 and then 10% off. That's a steal for these shoes. So if you guys have any questions about the Avancus Apex Power Shoes, feel free to leave them in the comment section. And as always, guys, please hit that like button, subscribe, and thanks for watching.